that you see a foundation book to study would be Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, and that encapsulates the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So they're in two sections. And how he would have compiled it is from his assembled knowledge of all the commentators that are there. For example, Vyasa, and then Vajaspati's glass would be there. And because it's sutra literature, that means a bare minimum thread, just aphoristic statements, is necessary to make an expansion on that. I was explaining how that's a wonderful learning technique, since if we discuss the subject of time is money, and we discuss all kinds of things, such as there's a value of a second, there's a value of a minute, and that will never be recaptured, and what you put in there is hugely valuable. In terms of thinking, which is the currency of that would be a second, something like a split moment that comes and goes, or a minute in terms of the currency of activities. Supposing we know nothing of that, but all you see as a statement, time is money, you may not know exactly what we discussed on it, or what the importance of it is. So simply taking up the sutras and trying to figure out, by virtue of a word here, or half a statement there, will be very difficult. It requires a commentator, and the whole purpose of a competent teacher is a living commentator on that. So Swami Vivekananda, pacing up and down, dictates this Raja Yoga, actually in response to a criticism in the West. This Vivekananda, they thought he was French name. This Vivekananda, why doesn't he show us the Indian rope trick and leave? And so his reply is, here with Indian rope trick, please study it. But it's a foundation book because it registers everything as a kind of science. Science means we use the same methodology that science itself uses. It's the science of religion. And so to remove any doubt in a skeptical age, this is a very good starting point. Not only that, but it tells us immediately that things are not what they seem, that within us is a life monad, as it were, some entity that is known as Purusha. Some kind of internal entity that is something like a monarch that reigns over a city. And this is what is described in Bhagavad Gita. 9-gated city is described. But also what is there in the 6th chapter on meditation, that is on this very subject of Raja Yoga, is the idea of meditation as a way, as a technique, as a movement toward understanding the highest reality. So meditation is very important, but of all the 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, it's not so important, because the Bhagavad Gita only dedicates 1 chapter to it, and a little bit of an introduction in the 5th chapter. The emphasis on the Bhagavad Gita is, how do we live our normal working, waking life to make the mind in such a condition that when we sit down for so-called formal meditation and guide our attention inward for more than just a few seconds or more than just a few minutes, then what will be the way of doing it where a whole torrent of ideas don't come rushing in? How can we fix our attention on one thing only? And the aim of Raj Yoga is exactly that. In the first few sutras we find it. See, a definition of yoga. We've covered that before. It's a misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the 2nd sutra in defining what is yoga, beyond the fact that it is concentration, and that is what is meant. What is concentration? Concentration is taking an internal instrument, viewing the mind as some kind of sensitive instrument, and then taking that instrument and guiding it in a special way, in a chosen way. Normally, we leave it to itself. This is a so-called normal human condition. That means the mind runs here and there, and we don't catch it, we don't use it, in other words, as an instrument. It's a bit like assuming that in this day and age where we have automatic cars means driverless cars. So we have one version of it. There's a Tesla car. You get into it, you program some instructions, and off it goes. But not to even program it in terms of putting in what is my destination, what is my route, and so on. What will the car do? The car won't do anything. It'll simply sit there. So if you don't use an instrument, it'll sit there, and if it has this organically active nature, then it'll decide to run everywhere. Do you have some example like that? Yes, a dog. You take a dog for a walk. If you don't control it, if you just take it for a walk in Phoenix Park, let it off the leash, then it'll decide to run here and there, everywhere. It'll get engaged with in a competitive way with the other dogs. It'll sniff here, sniff there. And it requires maybe, especially if it's a puppy, it requires some persuasion to bring it back. It's too interested in everything that it experiences. The mind is designed to be like that. It's designed to capture experiences. But mainly it's to do with the outer world, not the internal world. When we steer it internally, we call it a kind of psychology. And so a psychology is necessary. Some kind of psychological understanding has to be necessary to see what is the nature of the mind. What it is its geography and all its various compartments. And how do we take that one thing, which is something like a probe, called attention, and deliberately steer it in a chosen way, in a scientifically organized way, a systematic way, a regular way. Well, many spiritual aspirants have this difficulty and think it's okay. So if you have a kind of temperament like that, you'll dip your attention into anything, anywhere it chooses. It chooses, not you. It's interesting. And in this modern day of modern technology, there are many attractive things for it to be deviated to, diverted to. So it can be diverted. If you want to keep a child quiet in this modern day and age, sit him or her in a room with their phone. But of course the phone has to be, you have to say what program on the phone you're getting the child to watch. Otherwise you'll be dialing Argentina or something. And that'll be very expensive. But there are all these applications and games just on these small phones. And a child can be occupied for hours together. Is it useful? I don't know. I don't know if that's useful. But what we know is the human mind is such that it can be very easily diverted. So it's easy to divert the mind into anything that seems to be interesting but has no profound dimension to it. Yesterday we had a class, a yoga teacher class. The whole subject arose because people ask, so what is Kundalini? What is chakra? What is this? What is that? See? And this is covered in this Patanjali Yoga Sutras under a chapter called Siddhis, powers. Are you interested in that? Well, as long as you're interested in that, unfortunately, the main thrust and purpose of your life will be missed. These are just baubles, toys, and things which are dangerous. Dangerous, why? Because they divert the mind. It is dangerous to divert the mind without any systematic understanding. Let us take, for example, the whole idea of this meditation. If you do not go through the prerequisites, it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? How can such a harmless thing be dangerous? It's dangerous because wherever you steer the attention, that has an effect on the neurological system. And the neurological system can give you migraines if you're not careful. Because if there's an element of doubt or the element of temptation or lack of self-control, then this is where the energy will go. What we call the mind and the body is a receptacle and expressive outlet for energy. In fact, it is energy personified. These are all explained here in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And because it's a subject matter, there's no necessarily pronouncement on this or that and the other. Let's give you an example. Under the heading of siddhis, it is blatantly understood and observed that mind-expanding drugs can be used. What will they do? They'll expand the mind, but that's all. And if you don't do it, or if you randomly come across it, will it not produce some kind of mental aberration? So 5 things are necessary in your normal working, waking life. At least minimal 5 universal things are necessary. And so the whole of Patanjali Sutras is circled around 8 principal characteristics, 8-fold path. This is called Ashtanga. 8 limbs. Most people want to go to the final one, Samadhi. Please, can you get us to Samadhi straight away? Without going through all the other steps. It's not possible. It's like saying, can I deliver my location on the top of the mountain without going through all the other steps? Can I climb to the toppermost floor in a skyscraper building without going, say, 40 floors, without going from 1 to 39? Can I leave all that out, please? So, if you're in a hurry, you will not likely be a spiritual aspirant. Spiritual aspirants should not be in a hurry, because if you're in a hurry, it will create anxiety. And you won't have gone through the thorough, step-by-step progressive process necessary to unfold the divinity that sits within you. And so, in brief, what are these 5 principles? I assume you've studied it, so you can tell me, what are the 5 principles?
You mean the 5 EM?
Yes.
The so not stealing, the love.
Yeah, let's short circuit it a little bit and say which is the most important.
Non-injury.
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 Non-injury, not non-killing, non-injury. So am I covered then? Is my insurance policy covered if I don't injure anybody? What do you think?
It's really about love.
Love is the opposite side of it, yes, yes. So non-injury is the negative way of expressing it. But supposing I say, I'm a good person, I never killed anybody. Would that cover it? No. What would cover it then? So all behavior has to be assessed in a 3-fold way. That is, thought, word, and deed. And if the thought is, I wish I could kill him, then you're not covered. Your insurance policy won't cover you. So there has to be a way in which we see things in a different light and do not have any impulse toward injury of another, regardless of whether our moral capacity categorizes it into morally positive or morally negative, or ethically good or ethically bad. We tend to have these categories, good and evil, see, dharma, adharma, virtue, vice, etc., etc. But the Kathopanishad poses a question. What is that is beyond these pairs of opposites? And beyond time itself? Is there something like that? So all of these are relevant questions to examine the subject. So it has to be something which is truthful, and so automatically this value aligns with this truthfulness. Truthfulness again in thought, word and deed. Non-stealing. These are subtle principles. I never stole in my life, all right. But if you're an employee, are you stealing time that belongs to somebody else? Are you, in your mind's eye, envious of somebody who has something that you don't have? Is that a form of stealing? So this illustrates how mere production of these words, without this elucidation and elaboration, have not much meaning. And if they have no meaning, how will you practice them? So how would we view individuals, and how do we view the various different components in the scenes presented in front of you in such a way that not even a murmur, not even a thought or an inclination, not even a feather of non-injury will occur to you? How will you cultivate your life? It's not as easy as you think. And then what else is necessary? Self-control, brahmacharya, all the sexual energy that is available. The yogi ideally must bring it all together and focus it in one direction. And this is mentioned again in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So brahmacharya, self-control is necessary. This is a condition laid out in all practices and all religions. And this is where the downfall of a religion can also occur, be it Buddhism or be it Christianity. The Christian Reformation occurred because of the deviation of this principle. Thinking that lip service will be good enough, or just adhering to a superficial principle will be good enough. If you take the history of all the popes and so on, I have to say, and everyone has to honestly admit, that it was nothing like what the Catholic Church is today. All the popes were more like the mafia, than holy people. It is said that in King Henry VIII's time, Pope Leo, was it Pope Leo? No, it was, it was Martin Luther's time. It may have been the same Pope, Martin Luther's time. The Pope obviously opposed all the theses that were nailed to the door that Luther did, and in Wittenberg, I think it was. But you see, this Pope was more interested in hunting and horse riding than theology. And it was said he didn't really know how to engage in the liturgy, what the Catholics call the Mass. He didn't know it. But living in a luxurious palace, in contrast to Jesus, who never put any silken thing on, we presume, and wore sandals, and went into Jerusalem on a donkey. I remember there was in the 1960s, there was a very famous guru, 14-year-old guru, who was 14 years of age for a number of years. And so he said, I'm greater than Jesus. Jesus came by donkey, but I came by jumbo jet. I must be much greater. See, that kind of attitude and understanding. So with all the trappings of religion, over time, we miss the central point of the central values. And before we move on, says this Patanjali Yoga Sutras, telling you, giving you a structure, giving you a nice ladder, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, 7, 8. Please attend to this one thing first, these 5 things. Having mastered that, you can then go to the next thing, these purificationary practices, and so on. Now, you see, if you practice any element to do with this meditation that comes in under the other limbs. For example, if you try to do pranayama, or if you try to do, dharana or pratyahara dharana, and so on, practice any of these things, then you'll be meditating on the destruction of the world, unless you become morally good. Unless you have the purification, the mental purity, then all these siddhis that are mentioned in the specific chapter dedicated to them will be there for circus performance purposes. Supposing I say, come, let us teach you yogic techniques. We all go to the water and then meditate. I used this example the other day for you. And in meditating, I walk across the water. I may have used it for you or somebody else, I'm not sure. We walk across. Walking across the water is something you don't see every day. There is an illusionist trick using perspex in a pool or something like that, and somebody walks across it. And if you know the secret of it, then it's easy. And of course your feet still get wet. But it's assumed that if you have sufficient faith, you can do these things. A number of stories are there. In Christianity, the story of Peter walking is there. Oh, you can also do this, And then as soon as he realized what he was doing, his faith failed him. So many stories are like that. There's a story of the milkmaid that Ramakrishna tells. You can bring the children in for the story, actually. So there was a milkmaid who lived on one side of a surging river. And, no, it's not in this book. And so I had to deliver the milk to the other side of the river. Anyway, the difficulty was how to get across the river. So she relied on a boatman to take her across and deliver the milk. And one of her customers would have been this great pundit, this great scholarly person, who knew all the principles of philosophy and yoga and so on, and ritual and all the rest of it. A great religious person, something like a priest. One day she was late. She happened to miss the boat, as it were, because she had to attend to her father, who was sick, and by that time the boatman had left and so on. She had to come precisely at a certain day. And so she got scolded eventually by this pundit. He says, "How can you arrive and bring my milk so late?" And then she tried to explain, well, there was no boat available. Boat, ha! Don't you know that just repeating God's name, one of God's name is Hari. You say Hari, 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 like that. Hari Bol, something like that. Don't you know that God himself will take you across the water, no need for a boat. You can just walk across. So anyway, the second day, the boat didn't arrive. But the milkmaid was there along with the milk. And the pundit inquired, "Where's the boat?" "Oh, we missed the boat again. It was late. Couldn't get across." "Then how did you get across?" "Oh, you know how I got across. I listened to you very carefully yesterday. You say all that was necessary is for me to repeat God's name. And then I just walk across." The pundit, his eyes went like this. He couldn't believe it. Incredulous. Now he himself said it, but now he's incredulous. So, being a skeptic, he says, "Show me." He says, "Of course." He goes to the water, sits, Hari, 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 gets up, walks across with the empty pot of the milk on her head. And then she looks at the pundit, "Come on." And the pundit said, "Well, if she can do it, maybe I can do it." So he just put on a new dhoti, a new cloth that day, yellow cloth. And so he didn't want to get his feet wet, so he left it. Because he was so concerned with getting his cloth wet. And he started off hesitantly and realized what he was doing. Hari, 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 Hari. Attention went to the cloth, and immediately he fell into the water. See? So there's a vast gap that we have very often between the principle and the practice. We very often know the principles backwards and forwards. You study at these workshops and talks and these study groups and so on. You'll surely know the principles. But the practice is very difficult. There's a natural inclination against the practice on several counts, one of which is a certain conditioning of the mind and a certain rebellious nature that we have too. We don't like change either. There are a number of different factors are there between the principle and the practice. The principle says, very simply, from the Vedantic point of view, there is only one existence. And the divinity in you is one with that. Third principle is, all of this that you see, all the scenes and so on, this is all mithya. It is all a mere appearance. It has no reality to it. As science is grappling with this at the moment because that is its conclusion also. But we are stuck in Newtonian physics. We are stuck in Euclidean geometry because our three-dimensional view and all our senses that register moment on moment on moment that this is in fact our reality flies in the face of it. It goes against it. So we need some kind of emotional conviction about it. Otherwise, although we know the principles, and the principles are rationally worked out, we have to have an empirical experience of it. This practice of yoga means, regardless of which kind of yoga it is, and preferably an amalgamation, a unity of all these approaches, so that eventually what we will find is that there is this empirical understanding of it, and all the emotions catch up with the rationale of it. We get the experience of it. But if we settle for other experiences, we'll lose it completely. We have to avoid this temptation of getting involved with all kinds of things that take our heart away from something which is very simple. Some people don't like to be ordinary. They relish the unusual. And the mind wants to go everywhere. Controlling the mind is very important. Not succumbing to its mere will or its mere whim is very important. So the actual practice of this is very important. And the first section of this Patanjali Yoga Sutras is concerned with the principle of it. And then the second is to do with the practice of it. And the third is to do with, these are the diversions about it, which if you don't take them as encouraging steps on the way, will take your mind completely away from the goal. And then finally, the whole purpose of it is revealed in an empirical way. And this is seen as a separation. It means that yoga is in fact a separation. Yoga that implies a concentration and a unity actually shows that it is a divorce, a complete separation, like separating something from its stalk. And so it is described as kaivalya. Kaivalya means an isolation, a separation. It is necessary to apparently separate in order to establish oneself in a kind of unity. So let's find another story for the children. So here's a story. There was somebody who was a great, great scholar, great pundit. He knew many, many scriptures by heart. He could argue brilliantly and quote profusely from memory. In any debate, he always won. This reminds me a little bit because the other day was Shankaracharya's birthday. Shankaracharya, one of our gurus. We have a monastic line from there. Because Totupuri was Sri Ramakrishna's guru. Totupuri was purely Advaitin, coming from the Sringeri tradition. And so, one of the things that you can experience even today in the hotbed of intellectual Hinduism is Varanasi. The ancient name called Kashi, a circle of light, the meaning. So Varanasi is a place where Shankaracharya went after living with his teacher and getting their Advaitic principles. He then goes off to Varanasi because anybody who wants to learn and teach should be there. Even Buddha had to do that at Deer Park. In order for his ideas to pass currency, he knew he had to be in the vicinity of Varanasi. Otherwise, some people call it Banaras. And there, even today, you can enter into a whole discussion which hotly turns into a debate, which hotly turns into fury and anger. And then by the time the end of it is there, a kind of summary and conclusion is there, tempers have cooled down. And the subject is on Shankaracharya himself. Shankaracharya must himself have experienced it. But the subject today would be Shankaracharya himself. So somebody like that. So the simple villagers would wonder how so small a head could contain so much knowledge. And so the Pandit's pride was as huge as his knowledge. And one day he wanted to attend a debate to be held in a town the other side of a river. The winner in that debate would get a big reward. And so this Pandit came to the river Ghat. He hailed a boatman and haggled with him for a long time about the price. And finally the boatman agreed to ferry him across the river for, in this story it says 25 paise. It means a very insignificant amount. The Pandit got into the boat. He was the only passenger in it. And so to spend the time he started conversing with the boatman. He boasted about the number of shastras, scriptures, texts, scholarly articles that he had learnt. He mentioned the different scholars he had defeated in all the debates. And then the Pandit said, "My dear boatman," striking up conversation, "the purpose of human life is to learn as many things as possible. And what things have you studied?" And the boatman humbly said that he was illiterate. But every day he prayed to God. The Pandit said, "That won't really do. Have you not studied all the Vedas?" The boatman said he had not even heard the name. The Pandit declared, "Then you have wasted a quarter of your life. I myself have taken 10 years to master the Vedas." "All right, tell me, have you read at least the Bhagavad Gita?" The boatman hung his head and said, "Master, I know nothing about this." The Pandit smiled scornfully and said, "Half your life has been wasted." Now we have to elaborate it a little bit because I have a different version of it. Have you studied history? Have you studied geography? Have you studied quantum physics? You can go on like that, you see. And each time the boatman would say, "I know nothing of this." Then you're an uncultured man. And most of your life is gone. Half is gone if you haven't studied. Another half is gone if you haven't studied that. Anyway, half of your life is wasted. And after a few minutes, Pandit asked him again, "Have you read the Ramayana and Mahabharata?" Again, we can take a different version of it. See, have you studied geography? Do you know what country is where? Or have you studied music? Have you studied painting? Have you studied mathematics? Do you know calculus? Anyway, boatman remained silent. The Pandit said, "I can only pity you. You've wasted 3/4 of your life. Try to learn something in the quarter of your life left." The boatman looked sad. Now as they were talking, a storm began to blow and the boat started to rock violently. It looked as if the boat would topple and sink. The boatman addressed the Pandit with joint palms. "O venerable sir, O learned sir, I'm afraid we have to abandon the boat. I hope you know swimming." The Pandit was taken aback. No, I had no time to learn swimming. I cannot float on the water even for a few minutes. Please save me." boatman replied, I cannot save you. Only the knowledge of swimming can save you. It is true that I do not know any of the holy texts or anything about chemistry and geography and history and quantum physics and calculus or the Kundalini or this or that or the other. I have wasted 3/4 of my life, but I know swimming, and that will save my life. What a pity you have not learned swimming. You have wasted the whole of your life. With these parting words, the illiterate boatman swam to safety, and the learned Pandit found the bottom of the river. Knowledge is not for show, but for use. It should make you humble and not proud. And you'll find people who have a propensity for this diversity of the mind. They either may exhibit this external pride, in this case as the Pandit did, or there's an internal satisfaction. Not fully satisfied. And so they go through the whole of life, going from this to that to the other. And I said to somebody, I think it was you, like the person who tries to dig a well in one place and never gets it. So select one path, one thing only, and put your whole strength in it, says Sri Ramakrishna. If you try to dig a number of different wells, another story like that, it's about the man who wanted water, dug a well in one place. And well-meaning friends came along and said, that's not the place you'll get water. Last year somebody looked for water and it was under those trees there, so he changed his direction and went there, made a new hole. But somebody else said, whoever told you that is stupid. This is the place. Like that, 5 people came and he dug 5 holes, all only about a meter in depth. Found no water anywhere. The lesson was, a wise man came along and said, if you had taken all that energy and effort, and instead of digging something like, 20 different holes, all 1 meter, if you had dug in one place 20 meters, undoubtedly you would have hit the water table. You would have found water. So this indiscipline of the mind is not good. We have to take one practice and dedicate our whole attention to it. And in that practice we have to look at what are these progressive steps and what is the equipment that we have. And how can we take this equipment, namely this internal instrument called Anthakarana, what we in English call the mind, and specifically that aspect of it called attention. And how can we use it as a probing tool? Is an example for how that works? Yes. See, in a car has various cylinders. The engine works on cylinders. Let's say a 4-stroke engine, 4 cylinders are there. They should not all come up in one moment and go down in one. There's a kind of eccentric wheel, a rotor, and that allows one thing to go up and fire. Then the next thing. It might be 4, 2, 3, 1, like that, firing in a regular way. The engineer has designed it this way. What makes it fire? There's something called a distributed cap, and underneath that you'll find a very sensitive arm, the distributor, and it makes an electrical contact in a timed way, so that that spark then fires off one cylinder, then the next, then the next, then the next. So we have some sensitive instrument like that, which is capable of using timing and timeliness, 1 second after a second. It doesn't work if all the cylinders fire. It doesn't work if everything comes in one day, one go. All the available information being there around us, and the whole equipment to catch it, we should get it in the same moment. But then that won't be practical. We won't sleep. All the mind will be full of all this. It comes in one go. So it's designed in such a way to come second by second. Time is our friend in this way. It's nature's way of making sure the whole totality doesn't arrive all in one moment. And space is nature's arrangement of making sure that nothing happens all in the same place. So things are spaced out, and time is our friend where we can put something dedicated in and do it systematically. And all scripture is designed for the purpose of understanding that at least for a few moments, based on do's and don'ts, we can do the right thing, at least just for a few moments. Divert the attention, at least for a while. So when children come here, I know it's difficult to keep them occupied. Because they have an interest, they get bored easily and so on. And so we wait, and when that doesn't work, then we divert the attention somewhere else. A child falls down and scrapes their knee and cries. You pick the child up and say, oh, look at that flower here, look at the moon here, look at this here. Soon they forget the knee. But the knee is still paining, of course, but the attention has gone away from it. That's the point. Everybody can do that for a few seconds at least. But how to sustain it for a few minutes, for an hour, for hours together? It requires some different valuation of things. And so we have to look at the world differently. Instead of looking at individuals with our own version of their faults and failings and having a critical attitude like that, we should have a penetrating vision and be able to see that everybody is a walking version of a nine-gated city. And the preceding chapter, the Bhagavad Gita, tells us that we should renounce everything. What does that mean? Renounce all activities. What does it mean? Well, if this body is truly a city like that, with some entity by virtue of its presence making everything work, then we're not doing anything. We're not breathing. We're not moving our arms and legs and hands. We're not thinking. None of this belongs to us. It belongs to a city that is comprised of three different components, three mixed up things. These we call gunas. This is the nature of nature itself. And that is doing all the work. It's a bit like, you see, supposing you don't suspect, and somebody, some engineer, made a mechanism. Swami, will you test something out? So I sit on the seat, and knowing that I am fond of tea, when I sit on the seat, it triggers off an automatic robotic thing. So as the Swami sits on the seat, it activates a number of levers underneath, hidden by a cushion. We don't even have to go that far, because by remote control, just by radio signal, some robot comes in with a tray of tea and serves it and so on, like that. And I sip it and give it back. It packs everything up and goes off. And then what did I do to make that go off? All I did was stand up. Nobody associates my sitting with the robot. In that same way, on Mars, and places like that, a small robot moves around. And what is the distance between here and Mars? Vast, vast distances. You can't reach out just suddenly and move the thing around. All done by remote control. So, in that same way, by remote control, some presence that reigns there, by virtue of its presence, allows all these other functions. I can't claim anything of my own for it. I can't say I breathe. Poetically I can say it. For convenience sake I can say it. But I shouldn't mean it. See the point? So some revaluation has to be there in order to make these 5 fundamental universal principles work. How would I love? Knowing that normal version of love is highly conditional. And many scriptures would tell you, from a point of view of tribalism or conservation of a people, let's create a value. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Somebody hits you, you hit them back. Well, as long as there's no anger involved, that's the point. Is that possible? Sometimes it's necessary from a practical point of view. You can't have a completely non-violent society because your defense will go. Your defense against crime will go. There will be no necessity for a police force, nothing like that. Human nature being such, if you take all the security away from the banks on the basis that you have complete faith and confidence in man's morality, the bank will be empty pretty soon. So these measures have to be there. So we're talking of an ideal versus something that is practical. And when the one becomes more aligned with the other, then we call this moral life. Fully idealistically moral life. Until that time, we have to do our best to match up with it. Brahmacharya is hugely important. It's a key thing. Because apart from anything else, all our thinking not only has its effect on ourselves and the world around, like throwing a rock into a lake. The ripples will move outwards. Eventually, the whole lake will be affected. But the immediate impact will be immediately around the impact of the rock. In this same way, our universe works. So having done that and giving some kind of inclination toward this, we can now start in a study of this, because this book, the half of this book, first half of this book, is a very broad background, very useful. And one of the useful things is from the very, very start. First of all, an extract from this is given and summarizes the whole of what we call spiritual life for the whole of mankind. And here we find no mention of God. Because don't forget, Raja Yoga, like Sankhya, is a dualistic system which is fairly atheistic. At least some God is introduced, but not of a conventional personal type in this Raja Yoga system. But Sankhya has no God whatsoever. No necessity is made for it. And so it says, each soul is potentially divine, is the wording of this. It is a beautiful and oft-quoted statement, worth deliberating on and understanding fully. Just that statement, each soul is potentially divine. What do we mean by soul? We don't mean the psyche. That's very often interpreted as being the soul. Because don't forget, in Western culture, something that was the soul was always assumed to be the mind. Only comparatively recently has it taken on the meaning of an entity that is timeless and spaceless, something that is perpetually enduring, something that is never born, never dies, never lives, something that is unchanging, immutable. So that entity is what is meant by this. That entity, spirit that is within, when it is associated with this body-mind complex, and particularly the mind, when associated with it, but not actually it, that is why the introduction of the word potential is there. What you assume as you, as an individual, has this potential of divinity within it. And the goal is to manifest that from within. This word manifesting, this concept of manifesting is very powerful. Because it means that we don't start at a position and aim. In secular life we do that. You start off a career in a position and you want to get to the top. And ambition is there. Some success is there and is emphasized. It brings in an element of competitiveness. No competition in the set, because what is there is already within, just as a massive oak tree is already contained in a tiny seed. It just has to manifest, unfold. Unfold is a very good substitute word for this manifest. No creation in it, no competitiveness in it, but growth is there. And growth means it unfolds from within. What is the key to a flower or a tree unfolding? Is because the potential is already fully present, unchanged, 100% is there. It just needs to come out, as it were. It's already there. We don't have to look for God. God is not lost. There's no advert that I saw in the lost property section. Please, can you help us find an absentee God? Many people assume this. If God made the world, he must have gone on holiday. It's in a mess. So nothing like that. So potentially divine. And so the goal is to manifest this from within. It's already there. How do we do this? By controlling. What is really control? We control nature. Nature has an external and internal dimension. Forget about the external dimension, that's taken care of to a large extent. But the internal aspect, very poor. So what is that internal aspect? This is the mind. This is this internal equipment that we have to master. How do we do that? You can do this by a number of different methods. A number of different approaches are there, commensurate with the mind, and various aspects of the mind. You do this either by work. What is meant by work? Do we not all work? Yes. But the kind of work we do is stressful. And we get caught up in a stress syndrome and find it difficult to get out of it. How to get out of it is to do work in a special way. A way that doesn't have attachment to any of its results or effects. You do it for its own sake. Do it with the full capacity of concentration, with full skill, but with an equilibrium of mind that doesn't have any disturbance in it. As soon as we look to the future, what results will we get? Or will I fail? Or will I succeed? Or any of these associated anxieties that go with it, then it's only work. It's not the type of work that is described here. In one sentence it's there, or one word it's there. Or worship. What does this worship mean? Does it mean doing any kind of rituals? Does it mean going to the church on a regular basis? Does it mean lighting a lamp or a candle? Does it mean standing on your head and shouting Bazonka 3 times? Does it mean, doing certain things at certain times? Lighting a lamp because your mother did it, or their mother did it, or their mother did it, with no understanding of a meaning? That's all superstition. So denude oneself of superstition. All these rituals in esoteric schools are all meaningless. They're all diversions of the mind. All it's doing is entertaining. That's all. So forget about the entertainment side of it. And work could also be the same thing, ritualistic action. So what do we mean by worship? By worship we mean saturating all one's emotion in a single-minded way with a sense of adoration, a sense of wonder and thankfulness. Unconditional love of that entity that is a supreme giver, where grace perpetually flows on us, unnoticed, and for that reason, unreciprocated. When we notice and reciprocate, then we have something. I wrote on here, I don't know if I had this up last week. Did I have this up? Oh, then we won't attend to it. Yeah. So worship is that reciprocal understanding. All right. Or psychic control. What is this psychic control? Psychic control is this specific, scientifically directed attention that we call meditation. Controlling the mind instead of the attention wandering off in this way or that way. We gather all the mental or psychological forces. Psychic prana is how we can describe it. Gather it all and direct it specifically on a specific object, but it would always be this internal aspect, this potentiality that sits within it. And then by philosophy, do we mean the same philosophy that was described by the Pandit? No. That's just intellectual gymnastics. All this knowledge is very often useless to us and just intellectual gymnastics. What is our main diversion in all these areas? Entertainment. Entertaining the mind and the senses. Occupying it with trivial pursuit. There's a game called Trivial Pursuit. We can analyze what is our main occupation in life, you'll find it comes under this. We're playing a game of trivial pursuit. But we're not taking it in a trivial way, that's the difficulty. We're taking it entirely seriously and wondering why we are not satisfied, why we are suffering. And so, philosophy does not mean this intellectual gymnastics. It doesn't mean filling the head with knowledge. It doesn't mean a superiority. It doesn't mean a philosophy degree. It doesn't mean studying Schopenhauer, Kant, or finding out what Descartes meant here or there. And in the Vedantic context, it does not mean studying all these scriptures without making them practical. No. One or more, or all of these. So coming back to philosophy, what does it mean? It means the employment of the philosophical principles. It means having a discerning attitude constantly. So one or more, all of these, and be free. So these are described as yogas. These are described as, in order of mentioning, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja or dhyana yoga, and jnana yoga. But one or more, or all of these, it's very clear Vivekananda prefers all of these for this day and age, and be free. Be free from what? Be free from all this delusion, be free from all this suffering, all this apparent causal aspect of it called slavery, all of this, and be free. Free to do what? Free to do something useful, and free to feel your own inner freedom, not to feel in any way restricted or bound. This is the whole of religion. There are people who debate religion endlessly. There are some people who say religion is useless. Or some people who say religion is evil. The neo-atheists today will say that. We should ban all religion. And secular society has taken this idea. Let us ban all religious artifacts displayed in schools, for example, or public places. I briefly saw an article, I never had the time to investigate it in depth, but the headline was, and there was a picture of a stone cross. Should this religious artifact be in a public space? Was the headline. So I'd be interested to read that a little bit and see what it means. So take all of this away from schools, take it all away from public institutions, hospitals and cultural institutions. Take it all away. Although it's impossible. How will you take religious artifacts away from museums or art galleries? So that would be impractical. But that illustrates how foundational, culturally, these formal organized religions have been, even those who are not organized properly. So we find it's nothing to do with that. It is this inner search for inner meaning that is this purpose. The whole of religion is this manifestation of this divinity from within. And all of us are engaged in it, whether we know it, whether we don't, whether we like it, whether we don't. Because if there's something true, it will reflect on every single level. Why should we be interested in good humor? Why should we be interested in joyful pursuits or pleasure, if not because our nature is bliss? Why should we be thinking people? Why should we be skeptical or interested in profound questions or even science, if not because at our very core and foundation is pure consciousness, pure intelligence, if we have the capacity to love, because there's no survival requirement for it, if there is a capacity for us to have a generosity of spirit, is it not because that inner entity is bliss and love? So all of these things are there within us as signatures of our own foundation. And so it says this is the whole of religion. And then it becomes much more explicit. It makes sure we have no misunderstanding about the superficiality of things called religion. It says doctrines, that is teachings, rigorous teachings, dogmas, rituals, books, scriptures, or any other books, or temples, or forms, are but secondary details. He doesn't dismiss them as unimportant, completely, but they are secondary to our main purpose. And once you've constructed a scaffolding, you should surely throw the scaffolding away. What are all these things? They are bits and pieces of scaffolding. But supposing you decide, I'll build the scaffolding, and it has no relationship to the building. Supposing you take the opposite route. You make a nice scaffolding, and then break the building down. Oh, what a beautiful scaffolding. I'm not sure if they did that when they built the Eiffel Tower. You build a scaffolding to celebrate a millennium. Then it becomes such a feature, you leave it there. Now it's useful, of course, and people get a nice view of Paris. You can get a better view now from taller buildings. But nevertheless, what a wonderful marvel of engineering. You ask, why did you do this? So we can be preoccupied with the scaffolding and not the building. There are, supposing under construction now, are beautiful buildings in Dublin. Four Courts I saw was one of them, where they're doing some renovations. Then you make the scaffolding so attractive, you say, why should we not leave it there? And this is what we have done and called it religion. Made a scaffolding, not understanding its utility, and then made that a separate feature. Once the scaffolding is there and complete and has done its job, throw it away. Finished. So for this reason, Vivekananda makes the famous comment. It's good to be born in a church, but not to die there. Once it's completed its use, finish, leave it off. There's no other purpose. So these are secondary details. See what has happened, all the difficulty with the religions have. They've turned it the other way. They've made these the primary things, to the extent that people say, how can we ever agree on religions? They can't all be true. This is the argument that is put. And God is so diverse in all these different religions. Surely only one of them can be true. This is the way they argue. They completely distorted the idea. What is religion in the first place? How was it founded? What was the search? Was it not a search for internal truth? And so Raja Yoga provides us with a systematic scientific way of approaching this. What is this scientific way? Scientific way is mentioned even in the first part of the introduction, even in what we call the preface. It's worth reading. Since the dawn of history, various extraordinary phenomena have been recorded as happening amongst human beings. Witnesses are not wanting in modern times to attest to the fact of such events, even in societies living under the full blaze of modern science. The vast mass of such evidence is unreliable as coming from ignorant, superstitious, or fraudulent persons. He is living in the 19th century where, and we are no different today, nothing has really changed, where they were obsessed with rapping and tapping. Spiritualism, ghosts. If you want to pursue ghosts, then no doubt you'll be a ghost. If you want a ghost, you'll be a ghost. Whatever you want, you'll be. Whatever preoccupies your mind is one rule in meditation. Whatever you meditate on, that comes to you. If you meditate on, I'm a sinner, then you now created a condition whereby You are exactly that. You say, I'm a worm, then maybe next time you'll be a worm. If you pull people's legs, maybe next time you'll be a crocodile. Who knows? Whatever occupies your mind, that's what you're destined to be. So in his day, there was a great preoccupation with all of these things. And part of that came from a mixture of newly discovered Oriental principles. Initially, India was supposed to hold the Indian rope trick, the mysterious thing. And then once colonization took place and that was kind of the enamorment with the mysterious and the mystical was gone, it went then to Tibet. Tibet was supposed to be the land where all this happened then. And when that no longer was found to be, as exciting, then it went to Egypt or something, and people superimposed all kinds of things. So all this penchant for esoteric, mystical things is all so much humbug and so much nonsense. There's so much diversion from the mind. Vivekananda is very bold in his statements about it. He doesn't mince his words whatsoever. And so, he says blatantly, the vast mass of such evidence of things which no doubt are there, phenomena are there, unreliable, as coming from ignorant, superstitious, or fraudulent persons. In many instances, the so-called miracles are imitations. But what do they imitate? It is not the sign of a candid and scientific mind to throw overboard anything without proper investigation. In those days that he was talking about, that has been exacerbated in modern times. We are dealing now with modern superstitions of the scientific nature. Not finding anything of any substance anywhere, mysterious inventions are being made, and with such complexity that it boggles the mind. You take, for example, quantum physics. In quantum mechanics, which we know works 100% reliably, all the technology we're using is applied science about it. But how that works? It used to be the scientific investigation that the why and the how was, and there was a need to know fully what it was. And when Isaac Newton came on, it thought that everything had been explained to some extent. But ask Isaac Newton what gravity was, he bypasses it. He says, I don't know. Blatantly he says, I don't know. But nowhere does he say there's no controlling God. Then we have an advance in this. So in Vivekananda's day, by the mid-1800s, 1860 something, Darwin would have come out with his ideas about biological evolution, natural selection, survival of the fittest. All of these things would have come out. And yoga, as a philosophy, gives us a wonderful new alternative to it. It says that there is an evolution. The evolution of this divinity from within is happening. We just have to remove the obstacles from it. So that's a wonderful, different way of understanding evolution, other than away from something called a natural selection. That is, somehow nature knows from inert matter, inert nature, stupid nature that has no intelligence in it, suddenly knows how to make selections. And the only explanation about doing it is randomness and some kind of mysterious urge to survive. It makes no sense. Now if you now come up with the genetic side of it, he didn't know all that because the discovery of the detailed inner workings, inner nucleus of the cell, the deoxyribonucleic acid that contains all these instructions, it wasn't there. Genetics wasn't heard of at that time. And only a bit later did Mendel come up with the study of seeds and flowers and all the rest of it. Peas, really. Peas was the study he made to see the genetic traits that can take place and how these can be altered as well. And studied that very well. Inheritance was studied extremely well. Now we come to a situation where genetic engineering has shown us, and the study of genetics itself has shown us, and genetic drift has shown us, that any genetic variations are largely not in favor of natural selection. They're not in favor of us. And so the idea of randomness that has gone all throughout this theory is so mind-bogglingly impossible that we can only retain a semblance of what Darwin had. That's the situation today. And yet, we hang on to this idea. And then the same thing with cosmology has occurred, going back to an impossible situation of a singularity. And to make this Big Bang model work, you have to input inflation. But the possibility of inflation occurring from unusual conditions, the possibility of those conditions to allow it to happen, are so improbable that people are now looking for other ways. But it still remains the mainstream view and is in every scientific textbook, in every school and college, as a dogma. And so there's an ignorance in science as well, an unwillingness to deviate from what is set, and an unwillingness to do what science should do, that is openly and honestly investigate every possible avenue. It was there in Vivekananda's day. So surface scientists is what he calls them. That is, we only choose to study these things. And this has become much more complicated today because you'll only get research grants if you go along with mainstream ideas. You'll only get a favorable peer review if you go on with mainstream ideas and the interests of those who are reviewing it. So surface scientists, unable to explain the various extraordinary mental phenomena, strive to ignore their very existence. This is exactly what has happened in quantum mechanics. And the famous statement, shut up and calculate. If it works out well, why bother to find out how it works? It's working. Don't worry about how it works. But those who are interested in that theoretical physics side will have different interpretations. The idea of having interpretations to describe certain principles is new to physics and new to science. But nonetheless, not knowing how, some guess at it, some interpretation has to be there that has to work mathematically. In one interpretation, away from the mainstream interpretation, is what called many worlds interpretation. It means any possibility is allowed. That means it stops all scientific investigation. So there are so many parallel worlds, and then you've solved your problem because reality branches out. The minute you try and measure something, you just branch out into another reality, and we just happen to interpret the reality which is here out of unlimited, infinite possibilities. And in one of these worlds you'll find Harry Potter. And you'll find yourself standing and working and gardening, not listening. And in one world you'll find yourself as a theist, another one as an atheist, and so it goes on. In one world you're 5 years old, in another world you're 100. Any possibility is allowed. Anything that can happen will happen, is the phrase. They are therefore more culpable than those who think that their prayers are being answered by a being or beings above the clouds, or than those who believe that their positions will make such beings change the course of the universe. Two types of superstition. One who have a closed mind and say we want to investigate that. The other who assume that there's a being above the clouds. Immediately, straight away in the preface, Swami Vivekananda is taking away the superstition from religion. But he's saying those people who have a more sophisticated education and who have the capacity to investigate and analyze and think are more culpable their superstition could be avoided. But the other is a superstition just due to lack of education. So the latter have the excuse of ignorance, or at least of a defective system of education, which has taught them dependence upon such things. And that's the difficulty, is a dependency on it. Dependency on what? Doctrines, dogmas, rituals. He mentions all those books. Has become a part of their degenerate nature. The former, that is the scientific people, have no such excuse. For thousands of years, such phenomena have been studied, investigated, and generalized. The whole ground of the religious faculties of man has been analyzed, and the practical result is the science of Raja Yoga. So, for this day and age, to start a study off with a scientific approach and a scientific methodology, even as applied to religion, is a wonderful foundation. Raja Yoga does not, after the unpardonable manner of some modern scientists, deny the existence of facts which are difficult to explain. On the other hand, it gently, yet in no uncertain terms, tells the superstitious that miracles and answers to prayers and powers of faith, though true as facts, are not rendered comprehensible through the superstitious explanation of attributing them to the agency of a being or beings above the clouds. It declares that each man is only a conduit for the infinite ocean of knowledge and power that lies behind mankind. In his first preface, he brings out this wonderfully descriptive language that only Vivekananda can do, really. It's worth another read. So we say, it declares that each man is only a conduit for the infinite ocean of knowledge and power that lies behind mankind. Supposing you were really to understand that, supposing you were really to take that seriously, supposing you were to be, that were to be part of your empirical experience, that there's this infinite ocean that stands behind, and what sits here is only a conduit, something like a pipe, something like a kind of gateway that is able to express this. And those who have found it act as that gateway. That is why a man like Jesus says, I'm the way, I'm the gate. And misunderstanding it by exclusivists who say, I'm the only way, I'm the only gate, I, historical personality, am this. It teaches that desires and wants are in man, that the powers of supply are also in man, not from outside. And that wherever and whenever a desire, a want, or a prayer has been fulfilled, it was out of this infinite magazine that the supply came, and not from any supernatural being. The idea of supernatural beings may rouse to a certain extent the power of action in man, not totally useless, but it also brings spiritual decay. It brings dependence, it brings fear. We may add in his language, it brings weakness. It brings superstition. It degenerates into a horrible belief in the natural weakness of man. There is no supernatural, says the yogi, but there are in nature gross manifestations and subtle manifestations. It's very important to understand that. The subtle are the causes and the gross are the effects. The gross can be easily perceived by the senses, but not so the subtle. The practice of Raja Yoga will lead to the acquisition of the more subtle perceptions. But, and I add this, it would be a mistake to halt at there, on the basis that this is entertaining. All the orthodox systems of Indian philosophy, there are 6 of them, have one goal in view: the liberation of the soul through perfection. The method is by yoga. The word yoga covers an immense ground, but both the Sankhya, on which this is based, and the Vedanta schools point to yoga in some form or other. And then he says the subject of the present book is that form of yoga known as Raja Yoga, Why is it Raja Yoga, royal yoga? Because every method that you adopt will be a psychological yoga, whether acknowledged or not. What is love of God? It is taking that whole psychological energy called love and feeling and emotion in various forms, sometimes the form of anger, and redirecting it toward non-demanding love of God. So, the aphorisms of Patanjali are the highest authority on Raja Yoga and form its textbook. The other philosophers, though occasionally differing from Patanjali on some philosophical points, have as a rule acceded to his method of practice, a decided consent. The first part of this book comprises several lectures to classes delivered by the present writer, that is Vivekananda, in New York. Second part is a rather free translation of the sutras or aphorisms of Patanjali with a running commentary. Then he says, effort has been made to avoid technicalities as far as possible and keep to the free and easy style of conversation. In the first part, some simple and specific directions are given for the student who wants to practice, therefore very important. But all such are especially and earnestly reminded that, with few exceptions, yoga can only be safely learnt by direct contact with a teacher. And he puts this in italics. What kind of teacher? What we call guru, competent teacher. The other, you find many people who say, oh yes, I've read that book, but have you studied it? And have you studied under a teacher? If these conversations succeed, he says, in awakening a desire for further information on the subject, the teacher will not be wanting. Whatever you want, the universe matches. The system of Patanjali is based upon the system of the Samkhyas, the points of difference being very few. The two most important differences are, first, that Patanjali admits a personal God in the form of a first teacher, not a creator, while the only God the Samkhyas admit is a nearly perfected being, temporarily in charge of a cycle of creation, a kind of demi-divinity, that's all. Something that is as material as anything else. Second, the yogis hold the mind to be equally all-pervading with the soul, or Purusha. The Samkhyas do not. So this is merely the preface of this book and introduces us into a very important, a profound study, the study of the royal path of yoga as a good foundational method, because it appeals to the scientific method of religion, the science of religion, and strips away the ritualism or the things like that, the superstition that surrounds these practices and leads to a weakness and degeneration because of its dependency. So that's it. Om Shanti, 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 Shanti.